In 1981, two of the hottest directors in Hollywood each decided to make a werewolf movie. John Landis was coming off two big hits in a row with Animal House and the Blues Brothers. Keeping in line with his comedy background, he decided to take a comedic approach to his werewolf movie in An American Werewolf in London, which was released in August of that year. Beating him to the punch, though, was Joe Dante, who would become famous a few years later with the movie Gremlins. He decided to take a straight horror approach with his movie The Howling, debuting 5 months earlier that year. We'll take a look back at this classic werewolf movie on the next Back to the Feature.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
The budget for The Howling was only about $1 million, but it put everything on the screen. Between the werewolf makeup effects and the stacked cast, it was quite successful at the box office. Within a span of 3 years, Dee Wallace Stone really hit her stride in her career. She did The Howling, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and then the movie Cujo. In The Howling, she stars as reporter Karen White, who goes through one traumatic experience after another after being stalked by a serial killer. Her real-life husband, Christopher Stone, plays her husband in the movie and would also star in Cujo with her. Patrick Macnee plays Karen's therapist, Dr. Waggner, who has his own dark secrets. You may remember him from the Avengers. Not those Avengers, the British Avengers. Then you have Dennis Dugan as the nerdy guy who ends up being the hero. You might not recognize him from his acting credits, but if you're an Adam Sandler fan, then you'll know that Dennis Dugan has directed most of his movies. Then we have some serious veteran actors in smaller roles that were surprising to see considering the budget. People like horror giant Dick Miller, who appeared in such films as Gremlins, The Terminator, and Night of the Creeps. Kevin McCarthy appears as Karen's producer. Kevin is famous for such movies as The Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Twilight Zone the movie. In one of his final roles, Slim Pickens plays the local sheriff. He had a long career with two of his biggest hits being Dr. Strangelove and Blazing Saddles. And lastly, we have John Carradine, who had started his career all the way back in the 1930s. Besides being a famous actor himself, he would also have 3 sons, David, Keith, and Robert, that would follow in his footsteps. The movie starts with news anchor Karen going undercover with the police to help catch a serial killer named Eddie. It turns out Eddie has been fixated on Karen and has been stalking and communicating with her as he commits all of his murders. Unfortunately, her mic stops working in the middle of the operation and the police lose her as she goes to meet Eddie in a porn shop. She thinks the police are still listening and have her back, but little does she know she's on her own. She ends up trapped in a video booth with Eddie and barely survives his assault. She's rescued at the last second when the police come in and shoot him. But she's so traumatized that she doesn't remember what happened in the booth. Her colleagues, Chris and Terry, find Eddie's apartment before the police do and find his large collection of drawings. They take them to Dr. Waggner, who's the therapist who had been coaching Karen on how to deal with Eddie. The doctor is fascinated by the drawings as they all seem to center around a beast-like man. Karen returns to anchor the nightly news and promptly freezes up. The lights and camera take her right back to the video booth with Eddie, and she can't handle it. She goes to see Dr. Waggner to see if he can help her through her trauma, but the problem is she still can't remember anything, so he recommends that she and her husband go out to his country retreat called The Colony, where he sends his special patients for group therapy. That night, they attend a barbecue at the beach where they meet lots of the local colony residents, including a creepy John Carradine as an old fart named Earl. And then while Karen is taken on a tour of the colony, her husband Bill meets Marsha, the local nymphomaniac who immediately sets her sights on him. Karen wakes up in the middle of the night and hears howling coming from the surrounding woods. Of course you heard howling, Karen. It's the name of the movie. She wakes Bill up, but he explains it off as probably just being a dog. Not like a dog I've ever heard, she replies. Yeah, wait a couple years until you're being attacked by Cujo. Bill reminds her that she grew up in LA and that the wildest thing she has ever heard was Wolfman Jack. Being a big fan of Wolfman Jack myself, I thought that was a very clever line. Chris and Terry show up at the morgue to check out Eddie's body for their research. But big shocker, Eddie's body's missing. At the same time, deer are being found killed out in the woods of the colony, sparking an armed posse the next morning led by Sheriff Slim Pickens. 2 nuns walk into an occult bookstore. It's not the beginning of a joke. The bookstore is run by film veteran Dick Miller, who is helping Chris and Terry research the mythology of werewolves based on Eddie's drawings. He's got all the trappings of the occult for sale, including a box of silver bullets. Bill shoots a rabbit and takes it to Marsha to cook, but the only thing she's interested in cooking is Bill. Unfortunately, he doesn't feel the same and leaves. And on his way back to his own cabin, he's attacked by a werewolf, but is able to get away with only a nasty scratch. Now, it's pretty obvious the werewolf wasn't trying to kill him. It purposely only scratched him. And it doesn't take a genius to see where this is going. Karen calls Terry to tell her about Bill being attacked by a wolf and to see if she can come to the colony. Being a good friend, she arrives the next day with a picnic in hand. Suddenly, Bill, the guy that doesn't eat meat, is chowing down on some chicken and liking it. Makes you wonder what might be going on with him. Karen wakes up in the middle of the night after a bad dream and sees that Bill isn't there. He's not there because he's out in the woods having naked time with Marsha by a giant fire. There's lots of howling out in the woods, and it's loud enough to wake Terry, who starts recording it. Back at sexy time, Bill and Marsha start sprouting fangs and growing some serious hair as they turn into werewolves. I wonder who will get custody of their puppies. The next day, Terry figures out that Eddie had been to the colony because one of his drawings is of the very beach area she's standing in. This new revelation puts her in danger though, because she decides to play Nancy Drew and go snooping around a cabin where she gets attacked by a werewolf. Being from LA though, she can handle herself and gets away by chopping its hand off with an axe. The werewolf retreats and she watches the severed hand turn back into a human hand. Karen confronts Bill about the scratches on his back and he tries to blame it on the attack. She calls bullshit and he slaps her. This is definitely going to come up in group therapy. Terry hauls ass back to the main house and goes into Dr. Waggner's office to call for help. She calls Chris and tells him what's going on, and he has her start looking through Dr. Waggner's file cabinet to see if she can find a file on Eddie. It's her lucky day because sure enough, she finds a file on Eddie. And that's about as far as her luck goes. She's so busy being a snoop that somehow she never heard this giant-ass werewolf come into the office. I mean, he's literally standing right next to her when she first sees him. Chris is still on the phone and can hear Terry being attacked, so he hangs up and calls the police. Sheriff Slim Pickens answers and assures him that Terry will be safe. But back at the office, we can clearly see that she isn't safe at all. The werewolf lifts her in the air and takes a bite out of her neck, leaving her Converse just dangling. Chris stops by the occult bookstore and buys the box of silver bullets while Karen is entering the doctor's office to make her own phone call. Once inside, she immediately sees the place is a mess and she finds Terry's dead body. I'm pretty sure that Karen will not be giving the colony a good Yelp review. She's pretty calm considering her friend is dead. She goes to make her phone call but is interrupted when Eddie shows up. He's a cheeky bastard. He's very happy to see Karen again and wants to give her a piece of his mind. Like literally. He starts digging into his own skull, which causes him to start wolfing out. Very slowly. I mean, it took almost 3 minutes of screen time for him to finish. The practical effects here aren't great. They're nowhere near the level of what you would see in An American Werewolf in London. Karen just stands there the whole time. She didn't even try to run. She eventually gets bored watching him and finds a conveniently placed bottle of acid behind her. She chucks it in his face and runs out, leaving him screaming and smoking. Karen attempts to make a getaway in her car, but it won't start. She thinks she's having a bad day so far, but it's about to get a lot worse. She's confronted by a couple of the locals who take her at gunpoint to a barn where the rest of the locals are waiting for her. They're all standing around like creepers while Terry's dead body is laid out on display. When Dr. Waggner comes in, she runs to him thinking he'll save her. Nope. He's in on it too, and he's actually the leader. She asks about Bill and they tell her that he's one of them now. Then they try to give her the sales pitch on how wonderful it is to be a werewolf. It turns out, though, there are a lot of differing opinions within the group. Earl wants to go back to the old ways of just hunting humans instead of trying to blend in with them, and Marsha makes a power play to replace Dr. Waggner as the leader. While the colony folks are debating their future, Chris shows up at the colony and immediately goes to Doc's office where he finds the open file cabinet, lots of blood, and a disfigured Eddie. The first thing Chris does is get his rifle taken away from him. Lucky for him though, Eddie gives it back to him because he doesn't know he has silver bullets. Chris is like, hell yeah, and shoots Eddie dead once and for all. The colony wolves have decided to make Karen's death look like an accident, but they're intercepted by Chris. The same thing plays out here. They see his gun and think it's harmless to them. Those bullets he bought, though, were worth every penny. He drops the first werewolf dude and the others just stand there stunned. At this point, Chris even tells them he has silver bullets, and one of them still doesn't believe him, so he gets shot and killed too. So Dr. Waggner now believes the silver bullets are real and decides to confront Chris. He basically pulls a suicide by cop move here as he gets Chris to shoot him. The remaining members of the clan start changing, and Chris forces them back inside the barn. He and Karen then lock them in and douse it with gas. They set the barn on fire as the werewolves try to break out. They make it back to the car just in time for a werewolf to jump on the roof and attack them. They're able to get a shot off that kills it, and then going down the road they're stopped by the sheriff who's standing in the middle of the road with his rifle pointed at them. He shoots up their car, but Chris is able to step out and return fire, killing the sheriff. The car is shot to hell and goes up in flames, so they borrow the police car to continue their getaway. But before they can get the car started, they're surrounded by werewolves. Now watching this scene totally reminds me of the scene from Cujo where Dee Wallace Stone is in the car being attacked by Cujo. Chris gets the car started and they take off just as a werewolf breaks out the back window and gets in the back seat. It reaches forward and starts attacking Karen, biting her on the shoulder. She's able to get the shotgun and fire a shot over her shoulder, killing it. And when they look in the back seat, they see that the werewolf was actually her husband, Bill. She tells Chris that they have to warn people and they have to make them believe. Back at the news station, Karen and Chris are back to work with Karen back on air in her anchor seat. Their opening story is about a fire burning out of control at the colony ran by Dr. Waggner, and that there have been lots of bodies found so far. What I thought was interesting here is that they even compared it to the Jonestown massacre by saying that it was a Guyana-like spectacle. When the camera turns to Karen, she's very calm as she speaks. The only problem is that she isn't reading from the teleprompter. She's reading from her own notes, leaving the producer to wonder what the hell she's doing. She starts talking about a secret society living amongst them, and then she starts acting strangely. The producer has heard enough and wants to cut her off, but Chris demands that they keep the camera rolling on her. Karen is talking about having proof, and she puts her head down briefly. When she rises up, her eyes are yellow and she's twitching all over. She lets out a blood-curdling scream that freaks everyone out. She is now sprouting fangs and hair as her co-anchor steps away from her, as we see how different audience members at home are reacting to what they're seeing on TV. Most think it's an act, but there are some that believe their eyes. When we are back in the studio, there's a close-up of Karen's face, and she basically looks like a baby Chewbacca. Chris steps out of the control room with his rifle and takes aim. He fires the first shot, and the producer has the camera switched over to a pre-taped commercial for dog food of all things. At a local bar, the patrons are watching, and one of them comments about how good special effects are these days, while another one corrects him and tells him it was all real. The lady turned into a werewolf and they shot her. As the camera pans down to the end of the bar, we see Marsha ordering her hamburger rare. The end. I probably haven't watched this movie in over 30 years at least. Watching it again after all this time, I still feel like this movie mostly holds up. This movie ended up spawning 7 sequels, with only the second one being a direct follow-up to the original. A fun fact about this movie, I went to the same high school as Dee Wallace Stone. Not at the same time, obviously, but I did have the opportunity to meet her once at an alumni event at our school. I've always been a big fan and she was super nice. How does The Howling rank in the werewolf genre for you? Let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below to help grow this channel. I appreciate you taking time out of your day, and I hope you will come back for the next Back to the Feature.